Welcome to the American Football Stories podcast brought to you by Coach Paint. Today is November 1st, 2020. I'm your host, Nick Knudsen, and with me, as always, is Robert Parker. On today's episode, we'll recap this weekend's college football action.
What time is it?
Game time!
It's going to be special. They're going to talk about this forever.
Welcome to American Football Stories.
Puts his head down, crashes and spins, and dives. Touchdown!
Bringing together the many perspectives that make up college football in the NFL.
Football is one of the greatest sports ever invented.
From players and coaches.
Believe, baby, believe, baby.
Hey, we playing to win right here, fellas.
To the front office and scouts.
The public is finally beginning to catch up, but they don't even know half the truth.
Us against the world, let's get it.
Your hosts, Robert Parker and Nick Knudsen, bring you American Football Stories.
All right, let's jump in here. We're going to start off on acknowledging the canceled or postponed games. We talked about this on last week's episode, Rob. Big Ten, you're already seeing cancellations. Wisconsin, Nebraska, postponements with North Texas and UTEP, and Marshall and FIU. Rob, the Big Ten plan, it's already gone awry in week 2.
Yeah, I think you said that right, especially with the 21-day quarantine. It just seems like, that was a bad plan from the start of things. I don't even see if we can see a Big Ten season, finishing, especially with the protocol that they have, especially for the quarantine period.
That's the thing. I actually wrote this for an article that's going to come up on Read and Reaction on Monday here. I called it. I was walking through the Big Ten's logic here, and you go ahead, you cancel the season, and then you say, okay, wait, never mind, we're not going to cancel it, but then we're going to do an 8-game season with no room for error, and we're going to have the most stringent policy in college football. And I'm not knocking them on the attempt to put together a good policy, but 21-day quarantine, Rob, correct me if I'm wrong, but the CDC has a 14-day quarantine recommendation, correct?
Yeah, correct. And that's why the 21-day, quarantine period for the Big Ten just seems, like it's pretty much going to ruin the season moving forward. I mean, we see Wisconsin with their situation going down with the players being tested positive, and then we've seen a couple more situations. So I think the Big Ten season, it could be up in shambles right now. Depending on how everything plays out moving forward.
Yeah, just to be clear, Wisconsin quarterback Graham Mertz, who debuted last week against Illinois, he has a positive test. The announcement was on Tuesday, so let's use that as the date, right? Last Tuesday. That means he's not going to be eligible until Tuesday, November 17th. Welcome back for Game 5 of the season, Graham. Assuming you even got it. I mean, technically, I guess it'd be Game 4 because one of your games are canceled, but he's supposed to miss Nebraska, Purdue, and Michigan the next 3 weeks, according to the Big Ten quarantine plan. It just feels like, once again, even the 21-day thing. So better than the CDC, Big Ten, right? 21 days, like an extra week. So better than the CDC. It's just, I feel like the power brokers that wanted to cancel in the first place, this was their way of putting together like a really reluctant attempt at trying this thing. They're not, I just feel like their heart's not in it this season. I feel like everyone else is like giving a good, honest attempt. You see what the SEC is doing, reshuffling schedules. Florida, you and I both follow the Gators closely. They just missed a few weeks of practice, right?
Anyway, let's jump right into this week's games. We could definitely go on this topic a little longer here, but let's jump in. Thursday night, you have South Alabama falling to Georgia Southern 24-17. Fresno State defeats Colorado State 38-17. All right, on Friday night, October 30th, we had Minnesota go to Maryland, and the Terps pull off a 45-44 upset. Rob, I'm liking Big Ten football on Friday nights here. You saw a great game here. We're pretty shocking on Friday night until we saw some of the results roll in on Saturday. But Maryland couldn't do anything against Northwestern. And Baby Tua, as you like to call him, he was especially terrible at Northwestern. He goes for over, I believe, close to 400 yards and 3 touchdowns. He's got 394 yards and 3 touchdowns. What a turnaround for Maryland. They were down most of the game,
and end up coming back late to take the lead. Minnesota misses an extra point in overtime. They end up, or they go to overtime. They take the lead in overtime, and then Minnesota misses an extra point in overtime to lose the game. Rob, give me your thoughts on the Gophers falling quite surprisingly on the road at Minnesota. Maryland, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Once again, I thought PJ Fleck kind of had this program going in the right direction, especially from, the 11-5 season that they had last year. And, getting Rashad Bateman back, from opt-in out, I thought this offense was definitely going to be electric. But however, it just seems like this defense can't stop anyone. And that goes to show you, that Maryland actually had a game plan and they came out intact. And I know that Minnesota missed the extra point, but at the end of the day, this should have been a game that PJ Fleck and Minnesota should have came out and dominated, and they really didn't do that. They kind of let Maryland come back in the game, and they actually gave it away. But yeah, I'm right there with you about Big Ten football on Friday nights. I kind of like that time slot for Big Ten.
Yeah, especially for these like mid-level Big Ten games where I want to watch Minnesota play, but if that game were on a Saturday, Minnesota, Maryland would not be at the top of the docket. So good move by the Big Ten. I like it. East Carolina drops the game to Tulsa 34-30. Wyoming defeats Hawaii 31-7. Rob, we go to Saturday. The number 1 Clemson Tigers. They escape Boston College. Of course, no Trevor Lawrence, tested positive for COVID-19. In the Big Ten, he'd be out for the rest of the season probably, but he's at least going to be out for another week next week against Notre Dame. We'll get there in a minute. But DJ Uiagalelei, I practiced that a lot on Saturday. I'm sure I'm butchering that still. He started a little slow, but really the story in the first half was the Clemson defense. They could not do anything to stop the Boston College offense.
Yeah, you're right. It kind of seems like they were sleepwalking and, not having Trevor Lawrence there probably didn't get a chance to get them riled up, but they kind of settled in the second half and they came back with a win that they really needed because I think if, Clemson goes down and loses to Boston College, I think, eyebrows raises and, other teams is kind of pushing their way into the playoffs. And we're going to talk about one later in the segment in BYU.
Something that was really cool moment before halftime. Boston College, they called they acted like they're going to line up for a field goal. They had the holder run up to go under center and give a hard count. Clemson ends up jumping. They come back on the field, throw a touchdown the next play. But what was cool about the moment about the hard count with the field goal holder under center, Joe Tessitore, the announcer on ESPN, it was his son. So he's sitting there calling Tessitore lines up under center. So I know that was all over Twitter. I'm not pointing out anything new. Just wanted to make note. That was a pretty cool moment on Saturday, the Clemson game. But the second half, Clemson looked the way I thought they were going to look in this game. I think that, you're replacing Trevor Lawrence with the guy who's essentially going to be the next Trevor Lawrence. So it's not like you're throwing some scrub out there to replace him. I expect Clemson to be fine and continue to roll, but I want to talk more about the impact of missing Trevor Lawrence when we get to Notre Dame in a couple spots here. So bear with us. All right, you got Alabama 41, Mississippi State 0. I believe I saw a stat somewhere. This is the first time Mike Leach has been shut out as a head coach. Rob, absolute dominance. Nothing we didn't expect, but the Leach offense continues to struggle. Mac Jones, he goes for 4 touchdowns with no INTs. 291 yards. Najee Harris doesn't get in the end zone, but gets over 100 yards. Bama rolls, not a problem. Rob, what's up with this Mississippi State offense? Do you think that they just all called Jimmy Lake after that first week out at Washington, and he just gave them the exact game plan? Because my understanding is LSU blitzed a lot, and they've seen very few blitzes since.
Yeah, it's definitely baffling when you can't see a Mike Leach team put points up on the board, and that's kind of how it's been. The last couple of weeks they've been on that struggle bus. But I think Mike Leach gets it turned around, and I think they kind of get in rhythm. But once again, you have to notice that Mississippi State had a lot of off the field talk and drama, during this week, especially with the opt outs with Colin Hill and a couple more players and transfer players. So that was kind of the talk of the town, this past week. But once again, Alabama is just a machine. They're rolling right now. And I know everyone was talking about the loss of Jalen Waddle and just how explosive he is on the offense side of the ball for that team. But I think Devontae Smith might be one of the most complete wide receivers in the nation. And he's proven that week in and week out, Nick.
Yeah, he had quite a game against Mississippi State. Do we see Mississippi State figuring it out this year on the offensive side of the football? Is Mike Leach going to make any adjustments going forward?
I think he will, but ultimately, this is a learning year for Mississippi State and Mike Leach. Him being back in the SEC. So I think having a shortened off season and into what he wants to implement with the air raid system, it's going to take a little bit of time. But once again, I think he gets it turned around. I think they're just struggling right now, but eventually they get it worked out. So I'm not losing, total faith in Mike Leach and his system.
Yeah, really what I thought about him going to Starkville was it's going to take at least a couple years to get people in there, the proper pieces in there, because this was not a good passing team the last few years, especially after Dan Mullen left and you had Joe Moorhead come into Starkville. Was not a good passing team, very much based around running quarterbacks who had iffy arms downfield. And, you didn't see a whole lot of big shots from Mississippi State last year, but he obviously has the quarterback that came in from Stanford and Costello. We saw how it looked when things looked good, but I don't know. I think this is a little bit of we don't have the proper skill guys right now, and a little bit of Mike Leach needs to make a few adjustments. So some combination there. All right, number 3, Ohio State. They roll pretty easily, 38-25 over number 18, Penn State on the road. We're used to this game being the whiteout every year. Not at all the same effect with an empty stadium. 4 touchdowns and 318 yards for Justin Fields. Master Teague on the ground, 110 yards, 23 carries. Rob, this game, 38-25. It's a lot closer than it actually played out on the field. Ohio State really dominated this one. They were up 21-6 at halftime. They even missed a couple field goals throughout the game that would have stretched it out to 44 to. Check my math. Yeah, 44-25. So I mean, Buckeyes left a few points on the board there for sure. But Penn State, you give them credit. They definitely battled. They fought in the second half. They didn't let Ohio State just totally romp here.
Yeah, I think one thing that stands out is the mental toughness and the physical toughness of Sean Clifford. Clearly, Penn State was outmanned against Ohio State in this one. But Sean Clifford, just his toughness and the ableness to run the ball and being effective on using his legs. I thought that was something that really stood out against me in regards to going against that Ohio State defense.
Yeah, Penn State gets Maryland and Nebraska the next 2 weeks, so you gotta like their chances to bounce back and get to 2-2. But this is a team I know they keep talking about like, hey, this was a team that had playoff hopes. I know they were ranked high, but were you thinking Penn State to the playoffs this year? Because I wasn't.
Me either. I wasn't on that bandwagon of Penn State to the playoffs. I knew they have a lot of talent on that team. But once again, they lost a lot, especially, Michael Parsons, the big opt-out, pretty much the quarterback of that defense. And then when you lose Journey Brown to injury, right before the season, you're missing some key pieces. So when you're talking playoff teams, you're talking about those teams who are elite, on both sides of the ball. And Penn State is not one of those teams.
Yeah, it's interesting with Penn State, the perception of Penn State. I think James Franklin, I got a little theory here for you. Just real quick. We probably need to do a episode on this, but James Franklin had that win against Ohio State a few years back when Penn State won the Rose Bowl. And if you watch that game against Ohio State that year, Penn State, I believe they blocked a field goal to score a touchdown. They had a few lucky breaks in that game to beat Ohio State. So they also played Ohio State very tough a couple times, came up on the short end, a couple of heartbreaking losses there. So I think there's this perception that Penn State's playing at a different level entirely. But if it wasn't for that upset win against Ohio State, Penn State doesn't make it to the Big Ten title game that year, and they don't win the Big Ten, and they don't go out and play great in the Rose Bowl, and everyone remembers Saquon Barkley in that Rose Bowl and everything. Let me ask you something.
if Penn State doesn't get that win against Ohio State, what's the difference between what Franklin's accomplished at Penn State and what Harbaugh's accomplished at Michigan?
Nothing, honestly. If you ask me, I think Harbaugh will be a little bit more accomplished. If James Franklin don't get the win, but I think they're kind of neck and neck. I think that Michigan program and that Penn State program is kind of right there, neck and neck, and I think Michigan has a little upper edge on Penn State, if you ask me.
And I'm only bringing that up because although Penn State has been a good program under Franklin, I would say good, not great. They're not great if you think top 20 every year is great, but it's Penn State. Penn State expects to win Big Ten titles, national titles. If you want to talk about being on that level, you're not on that level on a regular basis. You're a solid program, maybe even top 10. That's good, solid program. But in terms of being considered among the elite, the Ohio States, the Alabamas, we saw LSU pop up and rise up. You'd expect Penn State to do that every 3 or 4 years, to really rise up and push Ohio State, beat Michigan, do all that. And I think we had that one nice run under Franklin. It kind of gave him a little saving grace. But there's really not a lot of difference between James Franklin and Jim Harbaugh if you look at it, guys. There's really not. I like what and I'm only saying that because we're about to crush Michigan and Harbaugh in a few minutes. And I just wanted to put that out there. Just had that thought this weekend. So that's all. Sorry, James Franklin, not trying to stir up crap in your world, but just putting that thought out there. All right, Notre Dame, number 4 in the country. Been calling them a fraud all year, Rob. They go down, they just obliterate Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech doesn't play very well against good teams. They play good against mediocre teams, and we saw that again. Notre Dame, I think Notre Dame's a good team. I don't think they're top 5. I still believe that. Their defense seems to be absolutely dominant, though. You had a nice day again here against Georgia Tech and really didn't need much from the offense. Just kind of had to play a clean game. That's it.
Yeah, you're right about that. No trap game from Notre Dame. They actually came out. They looked sharp on both sides of the ball, offense and defense. And everyone knows, the game that's coming this week against, Clemson. And just like we mentioned earlier in the pod, no Trevor Lawrence in this one. And I think Notre Dame, if they can put a solid game together on both sides of the ball, they're going to be, competitive, and they're going to be in the mix to kind of, come off with the win against Clemson. Boston College kind of laid the blueprint. But I think ultimately Clemson gets the win against Notre Dame. And just like you said, Notre Dame is a decent team, but I don't think Notre Dame is a great team where they could be in the top 5 and compete, with the Ohio States, the Clemsons, and the Alabama. So I think Notre Dame is definitely a decent team, but not great, especially at this level right now.
Is there a luckier team in America than Notre Dame right now? I mean, to not have to face Trevor Lawrence in the regular season, what that's going to do for them, if they happen to beat Clemson next week, and I say if because I still believe Clemson will win, but if Notre Dame happens to beat a Trevor Lawrence-less Clemson team, and then Notre Dame turns around and gets hammered by them in the ACC title game, are we putting Notre Dame in the playoff with one loss as the team that split with Clemson? I think they'll probably end up sneaking in the playoff that way, and that's like the sneakiest way to get in the playoff.
Yeah, I kind of see your point on
about it.
Yeah, I definitely see where you're going with that one, Nick. But another thing, say if we saw the spread, the Boston College spread with Trevor Lawrence at quarterback, it was right. 31 and a half, around that was the line that was hanging out there. And then, Trevor Lawrence contracts the virus, and that line drops down to like 23 and a half, 24. So that goes to show you, the type of cachet that Trevor Lawrence has on the collegiate landscape. And, the bookmakers, the type of respect that Vegas gives Trevor Lawrence. So say if Notre Dame does somehow knock off Trevor Lawrence-less Clemson team, right? And then just like you said, they turn around and Trevor Lawrence, routes them in the championship game. I think actually that hurts Notre Dame moving forward because, not having Trevor Lawrence is definitely not going to give you the same style points if you beat a Clemson team with a Trevor Lawrence.
I just think the win on the resume against Clemson will be enough for a one-loss Notre Dame team to maybe sway the playoff committee to give us another shot. Because again, DJ Ualung, I screwed up already. I'm gonna call him DJ for now. The current quarterback for Clemson, DJ. He's good. He's still a good player. He's a 5-star kid. Like, I mean, every team in America, he'd be starting for most teams in America right now outside of Clemson. He'd probably be starting almost anywhere in the country outside of maybe Ohio State, Clemson, and probably not Georgia because they'd figure a way out to screw that up. But sorry, it's Georgia week for all you Gators out there. Go Gators. But I think that this is going to be interesting to watch develop. And for the sake of not forcing Notre Dame into the playoff, I sure hope Clemson takes care of business in that one because I don't think Notre Dame belongs in the playoff this year. But we'll see. But what a break for the Irish. I've been talking up how this pounding from Clemson's coming. Notre Dame catches a big break, not having to see Trevor Lawrence next week. So, as you like to say, Rob, we shall see. All right, let's move on to Georgia. The Bulldogs, they take care of business against Kentucky. It was workmanlike, 14-3, good running game, no passing game, 131 yards through the air. Stetson Bennett only throws the ball 13 times, and no touchdowns. He has 2 interceptions as well. Rob, I'm no math whiz. I'm not even totally sure what goes into the QBR, but he had a QBR of 38.9, and I know that ain't good. All right? So here's my question for you. If you're Georgia, is your ceiling higher with Stetson Bennett going forward? You're Georgia. Your goal is to make the playoff, beat Florida, beat Bama, make the playoff, win a national title, right? If you're Georgia, is your ceiling higher with JT Daniels or Stetson Bennett?
It has to be higher with JT Daniels. It just seems like he's the more complete quarterback. He can make all the throws on the field. And I know George Pickens wasn't available for this past week game against Kentucky. But once again, George Pickens is not, the whole Georgia offense. Like, Kirby Smart has been bringing 5-star recruits in left and right. So he should have the talent outside of George Pickens to have a steady offense if he's not available. So, but with that being said, I think JT Daniels can lift these other guys up a way that Stetson Bennett cannot. Not saying that Stetson Bennett is not a good player. I just don't think he's a JT Daniels type of player. So I think, this Georgia team will definitely look better with JT Daniels at the helm. But once again, this is Georgia, and Kirby Smart and his quarterback, situations is probably going to be the end of him moving forward. But just like you said, we shall see. But I think JT Daniels is the guy moving forward, and Stetson Bennett is hanging on by a thread for that quarterback position.
Look, I love the running back James Cook, but he should not be your leading receiver with 4 receptions. The rest of the guys, the rest of the receiver room had 5. So 2 wide receivers and a tight end had 5 receptions on the day. That is not getting the job done. You could do better if you're Georgia. Time to move on to JT Daniels, in my opinion. I think Stetson Bennett is a quality quarterback. I got no problem with him. I just think if your goal is to win a national title, make the switch, Kirby. What are we doing here? But, once again, I like to bring up that we're Gators. So to give a biased opinion, keep the inefficiency up. Keep it up. So we'll see. Luckily for Georgia, they're so talented across the board. It doesn't really cost them much ever, does it, Rob? Except in the biggest moments.
Yeah, you're right about that in the biggest moments. But I really do think this defense is legit. But just like you said, Stetson Bennett in the offense, the offense is kind of one-dimensional. I mean, moving forward, you're probably going to see a lot of teams load the box, try to stop James Cook and Zamir White, and make Stetson Bennett, beat them. And if he does, you tip your hats off to him. But once again, you're probably going to see a lot of stacked boxes moving forward, Zamir White and James Cook.
Rob, did you know, moving on to the next game here, did you know that if you fumble 4 times, lose 4 fumbles, and throw an interception for 5 total turnovers, that you can lose a game even though you outgain the team, even though you almost double your opponent's yardage? Oklahoma State accomplished that feat on Saturday, losing 41-34 to Texas. Listen, we've been talking about the Cowboys being the only hope for the Big 12 to make the playoffs, but we didn't have a lot of hope in that happening because Oklahoma State always finds a way to drop a game that they probably should win. And this Texas team, not a bad team, but you're thinking this is the time for Oklahoma State to strike this year. Let's get it done. Let's take care of business at home. Well, 5 turnovers later, 400 yards passing is not good enough to get it done. The Cowboys put up 530 total yards compared to Texas's 287 total, and yet they're handed an L by Tom Herman's team. I think this is a big win for Texas. Obviously, it's a nice upset. Let's see how Oklahoma State finishes to see how big their win is. But, no doubt it's always exciting to go on the road, win a top 10 game. I think they're saying this is the first time since 2010 since Texas has done that, won a top 10 game on the road. But is this a meaningful win for Tom Herman to get the Longhorns to 4-2? I mean, I guess you're one game out of the Big 12 title race here again, but how meaningful is this win really, Rob?
So yeah, Nick. So just like you mentioned before, is this a pivotal win for Tom Herman? I really don't think so. We talked about this before. We talked about this Texas team, and of course, Sam Ehlinger is always going to be the star, and it just seems like he wants to win, and he will his team to a win. But you just kind of seem like Texas should be competing for Big 12 titles and not playing spoiler to the Big 12 title. But I think this game was more so about Oklahoma State dropping a game that they should win, outgaining Texas and still, not winning that game. So I think it says more about Oklahoma State than Texas.
Yeah, if you're Texas, you're game out of the Big 12 race now, and you really have your own destiny in your hands because outside of Oklahoma, you still got to play Kansas State. You still got to play Iowa State, 2 teams ahead of you, and you got to win against Okie State already. So if Oklahoma can knock off Oklahoma State and Texas wins out, Texas and Oklahoma are back in the driver's seat for the Big 12 title game here. So I think that's going to be interesting to see. Maybe Iowa State or K-State can stick around in that mix, but just a little bit sad for Mike Gundy here. I really, as goofy as he can be at times, he's kind of lovable goofy, like college football goofy. Like I'd like to see him have a year at Oklahoma State where he breaks through. Especially when you're dominated by your rival to the point where Oklahoma State, even though they're competitive with Oklahoma on the field, in the standings they're not. They haven't been a real competitor with Oklahoma. It'd be nice to see Okie State break through one of these years. Too bad it's not looking like it's going to happen this year, even though Oklahoma State is technically in the race. The one thing that we can be sure of, or they're in the race of the Big 12, but the one thing we can be sure of is that they're out of the race for the playoff because a one-loss team is probably not getting in this year unless you have some weird circumstances like the Notre Dame Clemson thing we talked about. Maybe like a Texas A&M could sneak in with their one loss to Alabama. You have to have almost perfect circumstances, in a home loss to Texas does not fit the bill there. So one more question about Texas and Tom Herman, though, for you, Rob. Not to drag out Tom Herman talk. Do you feel this Texas program is where they need to be? Or really, I should be saying, are they heading where they need to be? Because I like Ehlinger, but we definitely acknowledge he's a college quarterback with some limits downfield. Texas could probably do a little better at the quarterback position in terms of just arm strength. Like, in terms of heart and leadership, like, I think everybody's pretty unanimous on loving the guy. But in terms of arm strength and maybe doing everything that Tom Herman was doing at Ohio State, he probably could do a little better in the quarterback position. We saw a 5-star decommit at the quarterback position from Herman this week. Are the wheels coming off at Texas a little bit? Or are we seeing, like, do you think that the Longhorns will be patient with the guy? How do you see this playing out? Because if you're Texas, the one question you got to ask yourself, like we talked about with Penn State, do you see yourself on the level of an Alabama LSU national title ready in the next 2 to 3 years under Herman?
I just don't see it. I mean, but just like you asked the question, do you want to be patient with Tom Herman? Kind of the same question when Charlie Strong was there. We know Texas and the tradition that they have, even though, they haven't been, racking up the national championships like, the Alabamas, the Ohio States, or the Clemsons recently. But the tradition is there. And you know the type of talent they have in the state of Texas, and you know those facilities out there are top notch.
Yeah.
So right now, it really seems like Texas should be, the elite of the Big 12. Competing with Oklahoma, year in and year out, but they're not doing that right now. And just like you said, Sam Ellinger is a great college quarterback, but he does have his limitations. He's not the elite of elite quarterbacks, where he can pick you apart with his arm and his legs. He can do that, here and there, but not on a consistent basis. So it really seems like Tom Herman has to get the guy at the quarterback position. And, Nick, us being, Florida Gators fans, we've seen that hinder our program for, at least five plus years after the Tebow years. So once you get that quarterback in that you can kind of, have in there and be comfortable with, whether it's through the transfer portal or whether, it's one of those 5-star recruits, that's when you're going to see a change with Texas moving forward.
Yeah, I wonder if they're going to give him the patience to let him develop it a little more. I don't feel good about it because it's Texas. And so, but my thing is this: who's better than Tom Herman that you're going to go get? And it's not to say that there's not the option. And if you say Urban Meyer, I'm going to reach through the microphone and punch you in the face. Don't say it.
I mean, I have to say it, Nick.
Don't waste our time on that. Obviously, Urban Meyer, Nick Saban would be better too. But give me someone realistic that we're talking about. Like, if you're Urban Meyer, you pick up the phone, you're Texas. Urban Meyer says no. Who are you hiring that you're feeling a lot better than Tom Herman about? I mean, maybe is Matt Campbell gonna come in there and light it up? Like, what are we talking about here?
I mean, me personally, I wouldn't roll the dice with Matt Campbell, but I tell you a name that might, you throw out there, especially if they can kind of put a season, a one-loss season together this year. And how about, someone that's also in the state of Texas right now, and Jimbo Fisher. So I think that would be a great
Jimbo
look.
Would leave A&M for Texas?
I mean, that's a name that you can possibly see, throwing out there. We've seen Jimbo, leave Florida State, pretty much fairly after a national title. So I don't think it's nothing foreign to him where, he'll pack up and leave. And we know Texas has the money to give him the type of contract that he wants. And if he has to get brought out by, Texas A&M, I think Texas has the money to do it.
You think they got A&M? They're gonna give him A&M. That's a wild theory. I like that. See, I asked for a little wild, and you gave me it. I don't think Texas offers him anything that A&M can't. And if anything, A&M, you're recruiting in the SEC. You probably have some advantages over Texas these days. The only name I'll float, but again, is just. And I'm making the point to say it's not a knock on the guy, but is it really any different than what you brought in with Herman? And if anything, this guy doesn't even have head coaching experience, so it's kind of dumb that I'm floating him. But if you want to go with the trend in coaching, is Graham Harrell at USC, Texas Tech quarterback, former Texas Tech quarterback? That'd be a guy to maybe look toward. But is that going to put you in a much better position than Herman? I mean, outside of these home run guys like Saban and Meyer and Jimbo, something like that, it'd have to be the perfect coaching fit to do it. I definitely above where Herman is. That's all I mean by that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Nick. But once again, it just really comes down to, it's Texas and, the athletic department, the boosters is going to be patient with Tom Herman. That's going to be the key thing moving forward. And if they're all going to be patient, I think you can kind of get it turned around eventually. But if not, then just like you said, you pose the question, who's going to be the guy that you bring in behind him? So
I always like asking that because it's always easy to say fire the guy, but who you bringing in, right? All right, Rob, let's move to the AAC. Cincinnati just demolished Memphis. We were expecting this to be kind of a better game than this. But once again, Cincinnati, you take care of SMU last week. You take care of Memphis. You keep that record clean at 5-0. And the Bearcats are looking like an interesting team. I know we've been talking about BYU for the playoff, but is Cincinnati worth talking about a little bit here?
I think they are. I know, we're going to do a lot of BYU talk, on another pod coming up. But with that being said, I think Cincinnati needs to get shown some love here. Great game against Memphis. I thought Memphis would have come out and, play a cleaner game and kind of compete a little bit more. But I think the Cincinnati team is definitely a complete team on both sides of the ball, and they're showing that.
You got Houston, UCF, and Tulsa still on the schedule. If you're Cincinnati, your resume is going to be competitive with the other group of 5 schools. If BYU, say, goes undefeated, you're probably going to have a better resume than most of those teams. So it'll be interesting to see how they stack up at the end of the year. Let's move back to the SEC. Texas A&M beats Arkansas 42-31. This was pretty much in hand the whole game with A&M. It wasn't super close. Kellen Mond, 21 of 26 for 3 touchdowns. But Felipe Franks and the Hawks, Felipe goes for 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. They've been feisty. They stick around, and they end up covering in this one. I had them at 12 points, and Arkansas ends up covering in this one, scoring at the last minute. We know Arkansas is not a great team right now, but I can't get over the amount of progress that Sam Pittman made in a shortened offseason coming into Arkansas is just looking like Pittman's been there building for 3 years. This looks like they should be like in year 3 of the Pittman era right now, the way they're playing.
Yeah, Sam Pittman has definitely came in and he's made a transition to kind of make Arkansas competitive week in and week out. Right now, it really seems like he doesn't have his quarterback. Of course, Felipe Franks, entered the transfer portal. He's going to be a 1-year rental for the most part. But once Sam Pittman gets his quarterback of the future, and I think this defense has been playing lights out. So if he can get great quarterback play on a consistent level, pairing with that defense, I think, Arkansas could do some damage in the SEC moving forward.
Texas A&M improves to 4-1. Rob, we're going to play a game. Find that loss on the Aggies schedule. All right. Next up for the Aggies at South Carolina. Win or loss?
Win.
At Tennessee.
That's going to be a win.
Versus Ole Miss.
That's going to be a coin flip for me right there.
Ooh, all right. Versus LSU.
That's going to be a win with the way LSU is playing.
At Auburn.
That's going to be another coin flip for me.
But in reality, you say coin flip, but gun to the head, you picking Mississippi or Ole Miss or Texas A&M?
I'm going to go with Texas A&M in that one.
Same with Auburn.
See, the one with Auburn, I'm leaning a little bit more towards Auburn, and we're going to talk about Auburn and some other segments of the podcast. But I'm really buying stock into Auburn and what they're doing right now.
Only making the point to say Texas A&M, you lost Alabama, you're out of the hunt essentially for Alabama's not losing 2. So you're not going to get, unless there's some 3-way tie, weird thing that ends up happening with the SEC West, which I doubt. I don't see A&M getting into the SEC championship game, meaning you're on the outside looking in the West. But if you could finish in second place behind Bama with 1 loss in the season, you're going to probably be a playoff team if you're Texas A&M, which is astonishing to me. If you would have told me that after the Alabama loss, that we'd be talking about A&M for the playoffs, astonishing. So, and that's 5 winnable games, in my opinion, down the stretch. I know that's tough. Ole Miss is interesting. Auburn's interesting. Texas A&M's in the playoff hunt, though, folks, whether you like it or not. All right, Florida comes back after a few weeks off due to COVID concerns down in Gainesville. Lots of positive tests for COVID. And the Gators just light up Missouri. Kadarius Toney. Rob, how special is Kadarius Toney? I know we talk about Pitts and Trask all the time. Let's take a week off of that and make this a Kadarius Toney appreciation moment.
Yeah, right now it seems like he's definitely the best wide receiver that's in that, wide receiver room. And it just seems like he's kind of evolving into being a complete wide receiver, especially from the slot. He's running routes. He's getting over the top. He's electric with the balls in his hands. And he's been showing that, this whole year. So, you tip your hats off to Kadarius Toney for, coming back and sticking it out and actually getting better in the offseason. And it's definitely showing on the field.
Yeah, his strength is just on a different level from where it was. I like the fact that the Gators played some defense this week. Big improvement from what we've seen this season. Seem to be more disciplined, staying home, protecting their parts of the field, not being completely out of position, even though there's a lot of young players on the field. I was really excited to see that because I think this Missouri quarterback, Connor Bazelak, I think he's got a potential to develop into one of the better quarterbacks in the SEC down the road.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one, Nick. And he's definitely showing his toughness in the pocket. He took a kind of some tough hits going against that Florida defense, but he bounced right back up and he just kind of stared down the barrel of the gun throughout that whole game. So I think you're right on that. Way he can definitely turn out to be one of the the better quarterbacks that we have within the SEC.
All right, I need two more thoughts. I need your thoughts on the halftime brawl that was set off by semi-late Missouri hit. I don't think it was as ugly as they were kind of making it out to be, but it was kind of a gratuitous shot. Like, you didn't have to take it. I could see where some O-linemen would get fired up over that. But Dan Mullen was at the center of it a little bit. Then he goes off into the locker room. He comes back up. He puts on like basically a WWE style show with some getting the crowd pumped up, waving the arms around, getting the crowd pumped up, which, got to be honest, I absolutely loved it. And then afterward, he comes out at his press conference wearing a Darth Vader costume because he believes that his coaches should dress up for Halloween and celebrate with their kids. So I need your thoughts on those topics, and then we'll move on to the number 11 BYU Cougars.
Yeah. Once again, love Dan Mullen rallying the crowd up to kind of get some energy within the swamp. Just like you said, some punches thrown, nothing really kind of major. You don't want to see that. But once again, definitely a late shot to Kyle Trask on that, Hail Mary heave right before the halftime. And I think that's what this Florida team kind of needs, to kind of get some energy within that defense and kind of have them flying around to the ball. So I loved it, and I want to see some more of it, especially going into this Florida Georgia week. So I like the toughness and taking up for one of your players. So moving forward, I like the camaraderie that this Florida team is showing, especially on the defense side of the ball.
Especially when you're missing so many guys too. This is nice. It just felt like it was a very solid team performance, top to bottom, and definitely builds a little confidence heading into the critical game of the season, the game that should decide the SEC East. Florida, Georgia, Saturday in Jacksonville, always one of our favorites each and every year. All right, number 11, BYU just dismantles Kentucky, 41-10. The Cougs kind of coasted the second half. They were up 35-3 at halftime. Zach Wilson, Rob, tell us what we've been diving in on BYU. Tell us what you learned about Zach Wilson in your research.
Zach Wilson, definitely. I know there's talks out there about him being a legitimate Heisman contender, and his play on the field is definitely showing that. And he has a couple nicknames out there that we're going to mention, in another pod segment. So stay tuned.
You can bring it here.
Oh, so with that being said, Nick, I'm glad that we can get that nickname out. You have a lot of talk that Zach Wilson is the Mormon Manziel, and that's a reference to Heisman Trophy winner Johnny Manziel. Just from a stylistic type of play, just running around and being electric with his arm and his legs. And I kind of see those same stylistic types, but from a throwing standpoint, Zach Wilson is just it seems like he's years beyond Johnny Manziel, especially in his collegiate career. And if you, in my opinion, I think he's a definitely a Heisman contender, if you ask me, Nick.
Do you have a pro comp for Zach Wilson?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I know
on the put you on the spot. No, I didn't send you in the show notes. So just
I know on the collegiate level. I know on the collegiate level, everyone was the Johnny Manziel comparison or whatever. Yeah. But for a pro comp right now, I would just have to see him play a little bit more ball. I know I'd like to see him put a little bit more weight on to kind of on the next level to take those hits or whatever. But I would like to hold off on that pro comp right now, just to give a little bit more, couple games under his belt. And maybe after this Boise State game, he can kind of show some stuff, and I can kind of throw a pro pro comp out there later on in a different pod.
All right, BYU goes to Boise on Friday night. And if the Cougars get past the Broncos on the blue turf, tough to do, they're going to have themselves a solid shot at running the table because they only have North Alabama and San Diego State left. And San Diego State, I think they have 2 bye weeks before even playing them in December. So BYU is an interesting team to watch for the playoffs. We are going to break that down tomorrow with Desert News columnist Jay Drew. And I think BYU is going to be an interesting team to watch going forward. But this Friday night, in my opinion, now that Lawrence is out, maybe Notre Dame and Clemson can take the mantle again. But if it's not the best game of the week, it's the second best game of the week. BYU, Boise State, Friday night. Be sure to check it out. All right, Michigan State. Just so many questions here. Beats Michigan 27-24. And if I sound like I'm in pain, it's because I may have lost a bet on this game, and I don't understand it. I watched it. I just kept watching Michigan's defense give up critical play after critical play, and I watched them just indulge in maybe the dumbest drive I've ever witnessed at the end of the game, where they just were picking. I mean, Joe Milton's a young guy. He's a freshman, but they went 18 plays, 93 yards, and they nearly ate up the entire clock in the game. They end up scoring a touchdown to bring it back from 27-17 to 27-24, but they end up having to kick a extra point or an onside kick, and just it feels like a terrible waste of time. It feels like terrible clock management, and it feels like someone should have probably been coaching up that freshman quarterback a little better than to keep throwing dump passes over and over and over for 18 plays for 5 minutes down the field.
Yeah, this is a horrible loss for me, in my opinion. I really, after the Minnesota win that Michigan had, I really was buying, some stock in them. And then I saw Minnesota go down to Maryland on Friday, and I think we talked about it, Nick, during before the game even kicked off. I was like, I'm kind of skeptical on this Michigan team. And, this Michigan State team really came out and was competitive. And just having them lose to Rutgers last week, you would think Michigan would come out and roll in this one. But, this Michigan team really struggled. Just like you mentioned, Joe Milton, he's a young guy. He's going to have growing pains at the quarterback position. But once again, it just seems like, Harbaugh kind of has to manage the game a little bit better than that. And this Michigan defense really didn't look good all game long. So, I think that was one thing that kind of stood out for me was this Michigan defense.
Rocky Lombardi he wasn't awesome, but he just was steady. He'd make plays when you need it. But I was really impressed by freshman wide receiver Ricky White from Michigan State. 8 receptions, 196 yards, 1 touchdown. Just he was their go-to guy. Anytime they needed something, they'd go to him and they'd get it. And it boggled my mind watching Michigan have a lack of answer for him. And you felt good about Michigan coming into this one off a good performance at Minnesota. And I know Minnesota lost to Maryland, but I thought the Maryland thing was a little bit of a Friday night one-off deal. Guess not. I guess Michigan's a little worse than we thought. Michigan State might be a little better than we thought. And interesting times in the Big Ten here. Interesting times. So let's move on to the ACC. Another team that I didn't really see this upset coming either. Virginia 44, North Carolina 41. Some serious concerns. Sam Howell, we know he could score points, but some serious concerns about this North Carolina defense after watching them give up 44 to not a great offense in Virginia, and kind of getting diced up the way they did against Florida State a couple weeks ago, Rob.
Yeah, that's kind of seemed to be the trend of the season for these North Carolina Tar Heels, especially with them on the defense side of the ball. We know, on the offense side of the ball, they have a great offense. They can run the ball. They can throw the ball downfield. But it just seems like this defense just gives up too many points. So in order to be an elite team, you kind of have to, play good on all 3 levels of the field. And it just seems like North Carolina can't play that way on the defense side of the ball. And, Virginia just kind of came out and they were the more aggressive team and they kind of took it to them. North Carolina tried to come back late in the game, but it was kind of too late to rally. But yeah, this North Carolina defense is definitely going to be a problem moving forward.
We might be a year ahead of getting excited about North Carolina. Maybe next year. So maybe Howell needs to come back for a senior year already. We need to think about that. At Kansas State, they go to Morgantown. They get absolutely crushed by West Virginia. 21-point second quarter puts them in a hole, and they just couldn't get out of it the rest of the day. They turned the ball over 3 times as well, I believe, in this one. Just an ugly, ugly day for Kansas State. You had a great chance to take really sole possession of the Big 12 and being the Big 12 title game. You might have already been able to be a game or two away from clinching that for K-State. Instead, you fall back with the pack. Don't get the job done in West Virginia. What do you think about the Mountaineers' big 37-10 win over K-State?
Yeah, just like you said, I think, Kansas State and Oklahoma State was kind of in the driver's seat in the Big 12 when it comes to, the Big 12 title. But it just kind of seemed like, they kind of choked and they're back in the pack. And moving forward is going to be tough sledding for those guys. And I think they kind of they squandered an opportunity to beat West Virginia. And that had been good on their resume moving forward. But unfortunately, they lost that game. And it wasn't that competitive on their end. So, you tip your hats off to West Virginia for getting that win.
Indiana defeats Rutgers 37-21. They jumped on them 17 points in the second quarter. The Hoosiers were up 20-7 at halftime, but Rutgers struck first in this one. They were up 7-0 early after trading a couple punts, and I was impressed with Rutgers. They really stuck around. I like the quarterback Noah Verdell. Or Noah Vedrell. Sorry, I said that wrong. Vedrell. I watched a good bit of this game, and I was impressed with Indiana for bouncing back and kind of taking a tough shot from Rutgers. I was impressed with Rutgers for not looking so much like Rutgers. They're looking much improved this year.
Yeah, they really are looking much improved, and I think that's one thing that you tip your hats off to them and you just say, hey, we just want you to be competitive within this division. We know, you're not going to consistently win Big Ten titles or whatever, but just don't be the bottom of the barrel team within the Big Ten. So if Rutgers kind of can, play like the way they've been playing these last couple of weeks, week in and week out within the Big Ten, I think they would be respectable moving forward. And I think a lot of people is going to give them credit for being a competitive team. And that will definitely help keep some of those in-state guys in the state of New Jersey going to Rutgers, which will be a big help.
Coastal Carolina goes to Atlanta and just absolutely devastates Georgia State, 51-0. They're only a 2.5-point favorite in this one, Rob. I was expecting more of a fight from the Panthers. Can you explain to me, because when you look at the stat sheet here, nothing really pops off at you. I mean, it looks like a well-played game, 254 yards passing, 4 TDs, no picks for the quarterback. Coastal Carolina, they have 1 fumble that they lost throughout the game, but they only got 2 turnovers. And really, I mean, the defense played pretty well. You held Georgia State, I say pretty well. You held them to 106 total yards. So the defense was obviously fantastic for Coastal Carolina. But what makes this Coastal Carolina team good? Because if I'm being honest, I haven't watched a ton of Coastal Carolina yet this year. I saw that game against Kansas, and then I've just kind of been keeping an eye on them. We watched that Georgia Southern game last week a little bit. But just week in and week out, what makes this team good? And should we be pumping them up with BYU and Cincinnati as a dark horse for the playoff spot?
Yeah, I'm going to pump the brakes on the talks about, dark horse playoff contender with BYU. I think BYU is kind of, in another category. But in regards to this Coastal Carolina team, they're just a complete team. They play good on all 3 levels, special teams, offense, and defense. And when you have a team like that and that's getting good coaching, it's going to be a tough out. And I think that's what this Coastal Carolina team is doing this year. They're playing great on all 3 levels. They're getting great coaching. It seems like they're really buying in and they're having fun out there. We've seen a couple, post-game celebrations that they've been having after a couple of wins. So it really seems like they're enjoying, playing football and they're having fun with it. And, they're actually being focused and being competitive. So I think, that is the recipe for them having a great season so far.
Yeah, I'll pump the brakes on the playoff spot, but they did just move up to number 15 in the rankings, just so you know. Just so you know. And they get a game against Appalachian State on November 21st. that could be very interesting. And they got a game against a ranked Liberty team on December 5th. So we could be looking, if BYU were to stumble at Boise, say, and a couple other crazy things were to stumble, Coastal Carolina might become our new playoff baby. You just don't know it yet. So it might happen. Pay attention on that one. We might get there. SMU 51, Navy 37. Iowa State takes care of Kansas 52-22. Oklahoma 62. Texas Tech 28. Any surprises here in this one, Rob? Or did Spencer Rattler and the Sooners respond exactly how you expected?
Just like you said, they responded just like I expected. I think the losses to Oklahoma early in the season really kind of, opened their eyes and saying, hey, we're having a Big 12, conference schedule within a pandemic shortened season. So we have to play, week in and week out. We can't lose focus. And it really seemed like they had, Texas Tech attention throughout this whole game, and it showed. Spencer Rattler and the Sooners just rolled in this one. So yeah, I didn't expect anything less from Lincoln Riley and the Sooners in this game.
Unfortunately, those two losses came to Kansas State and Iowa State. So you can't say that Oklahoma totally controls its destiny in terms of getting the Big 12 title game just yet, because both of those schools only have one loss in the Big 12. But one of the teams that ahead of them, Oklahoma State, on the schedule for November 21st here for Oklahoma. And the Sooners, if they take care of business, I kind of think that Iowa State and or Kansas State is going to drop another game or two. So if Oklahoma just stays focused and keeps taking care of business, they may very well play themselves back into the Big 12 title game. Same old boring Big 12, nothing new. Thought we were going to get some new blood this year. Looking like Oklahoma's going to sneak back in there. Boise State defeats Air Force 49-30. FAU 24. UTSA San Antonio, Texas San Antonio 24-3. FAU gets a nice win there. Tulane 38. Temple 3. Purdue beats Illinois 31-24. Illinois is missing a lot of players in that one. Tough win there. Wake 38. Syracuse 14. UCF handles Houston 44-21. Rice 30. Southern Miss 6. Troy 38. Arkansas State 10. Louisiana Tech defeats UAB 37-34. TCU jumps out to a huge lead before kind of playing it tight down the stretch here, and they get a 10-point win, 33-23 over Baylor. And Rob, the final game we'll talk about before I read off a few more scores, but we'll talk about this game first, actually. LSU Auburn, and this game 48-11 looks like a total blowout. It was, don't get me wrong, but it was 0-0 heading into the second quarter, and then you saw 2 turnovers from freshman quarterback TJ Finley really swing the momentum of this game, and LSU just couldn't get up off the mat.
Yeah, once again, those turnovers kind of opened the floodgates for Auburn to take a big lead. Bo Nix has been playing pretty well. I know we've kind of gotten on him about his progression for last year to this year, and it seems like he's kind of heating up and he's zoning in. And if a healthy Bo Nix, going with Tank Bigsby in the backfield, I think this Auburn team can be a tough out moving forward.
Yeah, Bo Nix, give him credit. We have been tough on him. He did play well. If you're Auburn, you got Mississippi State, Tennessee before Alabama, and then you end your season with Texas A&M. So the 4-2 Tigers looking pretty good. The Bayou Bengals, the Tigers, not looking so good. So LSU, you got a bye week before Alabama, and I don't think that's going to go all that well. Not too excited about that one if you're an LSU fan. So Northwestern goes into Iowa City, gets a 1-point win over Iowa, 21-20. Mississippi crushes Vandy, 54-21. App State, 31. Louisiana Monroe, 13. Va Tech, 42. Louisville, 35. San Jose State gets a win over New Mexico, 38-21. Duke, 53. Charlotte, 19. Thought that one was going to be a little closer. Shout out to your boy Alex Highsmith for getting an interception for the Pittsburgh Steelers today, Rob. Louisiana, Raging Cajuns, 44. Texas State, 34. San Diego State, 38. Utah State, 7. Nevada, 37. UNLV, 19. Rob, that's college football for this week. You got any final thoughts before we move on to the Did You Know question?
No final thoughts for me tonight, Nick.
All right. The Did You Know brought to you by Coach Paint. We mentioned Notre Dame and Clemson coming up this week. Rob, it's been a minute since Notre Dame has defeated a number one ranked team in the country. I want to know when was the last time that Notre Dame defeated the number one ranked team in the country? Great tool that allows us to add graphics to player highlight clips, similar to the graphics you see on TV. Coach Paint offers the ability to clearly tell a straight video while increasing retention of information. Rob, when was the last time Notre Dame defeated the number one ranked team in the country?
Wow. I'm definitely sure I have to go back with that answer. Definitely it's not going to be more recent. Just with the ups and downs of that Notre Dame program over the last couple of years. I know they were in the playoffs against Alabama, a while back, which they kind of took to the woodshed on that one. But I don't recall them beating the number one team that particular season. So I definitely have to go back even further. So probably one team that I'm going to lean that I know they play a lot that probably, had a number one ranking will be, the USC Trojans.
They've played, that's actually the last time they've played the number one team was USC in 2004 and 2005. And I'll give you a hint. It wasn't either one of those games.
Wow. Okay.
Because 05 was the Bush push. Remember that?
Yeah.
And they lost in 04 as well.
So that was definitely my first guess. For some reason, I definitely want to stay with the teams that they normally play. And so USC is definitely one. Trying to think. Wow.
Let me know when you're ready for your second hint.
I think I'm ready for that second hint now.
All right. The second hint is, if you're a fan of College Game Day, this was the series debut on campus where College Game Day first traveled to go to a game at a campus. First time they ever went on site somewhere was at this game where Notre Dame defeated the number one team in the country.
Wow. College Game Day. Notre Dame defeats number one. Wow.
The number one team had the Heisman Trophy winner that year.
Heisman Trophy winner. Maybe I go with wow. I'm blanking right now. Let me just throw Ohio State out there, Nick. How about that?
You had Charlie Ward in the number one Florida State Seminoles. Traveled to South Bend on November 13th, 1993. This was College Game Day's first on-site visit. If you've ever seen those old clips of them in the gym, I thought they bring that up all the time on there. But Notre Dame followed up the upset win over Florida State. This is Lou Holtz era still. They followed up the upset win over Florida State by losing to Boston College 41-39 as the number one ranked team the following week. This was 1-2, by the way. Notre Dame versus Florida State, 1-2. They followed up by losing to Boston College the following week, and FSU ends up winning the national title because of that, even though both teams finished 11-1 on the season. So Notre Dame also lost to the last three times they played the number one team. Before that Florida State game, they lost to USC in 2004 and 5, and then they lost to number one Nebraska in 2000. So just some Notre Dame versus number one for you. So I would have figured they would have played a few more games against the number one ranked team. Just feels like they get that opportunity every now and then. But just to show you, it's not even common to play them, let alone win. It's been since 1993 that Notre Dame has knocked off the number one team in college football. That's a little shocking.
Definitely a little shocking if you ask me. Just like you say, you would think Notre Dame will play way more number one ranked teams. Just how their schedule is set up, being independent. But that's a great question, Nick. Great question.
All right. So that's all I got for tonight, Rob. If you're good, you want to wrap us up and read us out?
Sure. Once again, we would just like to appreciate all of our listeners to listen to this episode of American Football Stories. You can find us on Apple Podcasts and YouTube. Please subscribe and rate us 5 stars. Follow us on Twitter at American FB Story and check out our website, AmericanFootballStories.com. Once again, my name is Robert Parker III and my co-host is Nick Newsom. So thank you, and we will talk to you for next week's episode.
You play to win the game. Hello? You play to win the game. You don't play to just play it. That's the great thing about sports. You play to win. And I don't care if you don't have any wins. You go play to win. When you start telling me it doesn't matter, then retire. Get out. Because it matters.
I hope there's Bigfoot. I don't think there is. The reason I don't think there is because we found bones of dinosaurs and everything else, but we haven't found bones that I've heard of Bigfoot.
I'm very upset. We should have been in the ball game with fast field goal. The coach had sent him in. We shouldn't have sent him in. That's a dang coaching mistake. The kids are playing their tail off, and the coaches are screwing it up.
We just got to stop that little inside trap. The option didn't hurt us much. We played pretty hard. We just got to stop that inside thing. Offensively, we kind of sputtered around, got the ball in the end zone. Defensively, we got to get out off the field on that 2-minute drive.
Injuries to your offensive line. What do you do in the second half?
Oh, we're just going to play. We just got to keep playing.
Thank you, Coach.
He has a magnificent personality, I'll tell you.
We receive a lot of mail during the course of the season, and a lot of it's good mail, a lot of it's bad. And one of the
I would say that most of it is good, though, isn't it, Bill?
Yeah, I think so.
I'd say 95 to 98% of the mail we get is always good.
But the one question that keeps coming up where Woody Hayes' name is involved, they say you're a man of no mercy. And yet,
frankly, I don't care much what they think.